A man terrorized California, breaking into homes, watching his victims, and vanishing without a trace. He had no name, no face, and the most terrifying part? He was hiding in plain sight. The summer nights in California during the 1970s carried a kind of quiet that felt safe. Suburban streets rested under orange streetlights. Doors were left unlocked, and people believed that evil belonged somewhere far away, hidden in big cities or dark alleyways. But in places like Sacramento, Visalia, and later Southern California, something was moving in the shadows. Something patient, something methodical, and for years, no one knew his name. He would eventually become known as the Golden State Killer case, a name that would haunt generations, not just because of what he did, but because of how long he got away with it. It didn't start with murder, it started with fear. This is Avalor. Subscribe for deep documentary storytelling. Now, let's begin. In the mid-1970s, residents of Visalia began reporting strange incidents. Someone prowling at night, breaking into homes, stealing small, seemingly meaningless items. Jewelry, coins, personal belongings. It felt less like theft and more like intrusion. Like someone was testing boundaries, learning habits, studying routines. Then, in 1975, a man named Claude Snelling was shot and killed while trying to stop an intruder from kidnapping his daughter. It was shocking, but it didn't yet connect to something bigger. Not then. Soon after, the attacks escalated and moved north. In Sacramento, a new name emerged from whispers and police reports: the East Area Rapist. He struck at night, entering homes quietly, often when couples were asleep. He would tie up the husband, place dishes on his back, warning that if they rattled, he would kill them, and then assault the wife. It was calculated, terrifying, and deeply psychological. He didn't just want control. He wanted fear to linger long after he was gone. He watched his victims. That was one of the most disturbing parts. He would call them before or after attacks, sometimes breathing heavily into the phone, sometimes whispering threats. Survivors recalled the feeling of being observed long before anything happened. Curtains slightly moved, footsteps outside, a sense that someone had been there, learning them, studying them like a puzzle. The police were overwhelmed. There were patterns, same method of entry, same binding techniques, but no clear suspect. Sketches were drawn based on witness descriptions, but they varied. The attacker wore a mask. He was careful. He left little evidence. And more importantly, he adapted. Whenever law enforcement adjusted their approach, he seemed to change his tactics. Then, without warning, the crimes stopped in Sacramento, but they didn't end. They moved south and became darker. In Southern California, the crimes took on a new form. The intrusions remained, the bindings remained, but now the victims were being murdered. The press gave him another name: the original Night Stalker. At the time, no one realized these crimes were connected to the East Area Rapist. Jurisdictions didn't share information the way they do today. Databases were limited. Communication was slower. And so, the same man lived multiple identities, each one more terrifying than the last. For over a decade, he operated undetected. Imagine that. A man entering homes, controlling lives, committing horrific acts, and then going back to normal life. Going to work, talking to neighbors, blending in. That's what made this case so chilling. Not just the crimes, but the invisibility. The idea that someone could be so monstrous and yet appear completely ordinary. Then, in 1986, it stopped. No warning, no arrest, just silence. The case went cold. Years turned into decades. Technology advanced. New cases took priority. The victims tried to rebuild their lives, but the fear never truly left. And the man responsible, he vanished into history, or so it seemed. But some detectives never gave up. Among them was a man named Paul Holes. He became obsessed with the case, not in a reckless way, but in a focused, relentless pursuit of answers. He believed the key wasn't just in the past, but in the future, in science, in DNA. By the early 2000s, investigators had begun linking the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker through DNA evidence. It confirmed what some had long suspected. This was one person, one predator, responsible for dozens of assaults and multiple murders across California. The scale of it was staggering. But even with DNA, they had no match. The killer had never been caught, never entered into the system, no fingerprints, no criminal record that tied him directly. It was like chasing a ghost with a name, but no face. Then came a breakthrough, not from police databases, but from something unexpected: genealogy. In 2018, investigators used a public genealogy website to upload the suspect's DNA profile. Instead of looking for a direct match, they searched for relatives, distant cousins, shared ancestry. It was a new method, controversial at the time, but full of potential. Slowly, they built a family tree, branch by branch, name by name, and eventually it led them to one man, Joseph James DeAngelo, a former police officer. That revelation stunned everyone. A man who once wore a badge, who understood investigations, who knew how police worked. He had been hiding in plain sight all along, living in a quiet neighborhood, raising a family, going unnoticed for decades. But suspicion wasn't enough. They needed proof. Investigators began surveillance. They collected discarded DNA from items he threw away, subtle, quiet methods that wouldn't alert him. A tissue, a handle, something he touched. And when they tested it against the evidence from the crime scenes, it matched. After more than 40 years, they had him. On April 24th, 2018, police arrested DeAngelo at his home. There was no dramatic chase, no resistance, just a quiet ending to a case that had once been defined by chaos and fear. Neighbors watched in disbelief. Reporters flooded the street. And across the country, people who had followed the case for years finally heard the words they thought might never come. The Golden State Killer had been caught, but the story didn't end there. The arrest reopened wounds. For survivors and victims' families, it was both relief and pain. Relief that the man responsible would finally face justice. Pain from memories that never truly faded. Court proceedings revealed more details, patterns, timelines, evidence that painted a clearer picture of the man behind the mask. He had lived two lives. By day, he was ordinary. By night, he became something else entirely. And that duality is what continues to fascinate and disturb people, because it challenges something fundamental, the belief that evil is easy to recognize. It isn't. Sometimes it looks like your neighbor. Sometimes it looks like a former police officer. Sometimes it hides behind normality so well that it takes decades and a revolution in science to uncover it. In 2020, DeAngelo pleaded guilty to multiple counts, including murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In court, survivors spoke directly to him. They told their stories. They reclaimed their voices, and in doing so, they shifted the narrative from one man's crimes to the strength of those who endured them. That's an important part of this story, because while the Golden State Killer is often remembered for his actions, the real story is about persistence, about investigators who refused to let the case fade, about advancements in science that turned impossibility into evidence, and about victims who survived, spoke, and waited for justice, even when it felt out of reach. And there's one more thing. This case changed how investigations work. The use of genetic genealogy opened a new chapter in law enforcement. It led to the solving of other cold cases, cases that had sat untouched for years, waiting for the right tool, the right moment. It showed that even time, as powerful as it is, doesn't erase truth. It only delays it. So when people look back at the Golden State Killer case, they don't just see a criminal who got away for decades. They see a turning point, a moment where the past finally met the future, where silence was broken, where a man who thought he had escaped became a reminder of something simple but powerful. No matter how long it takes, the truth has a way of finding you. This is Abalor. Subscribe.